Welcome to Backstage with Richard Ridge. Broadway and London have a brand new power producing duo, husbands Sean E. Nyberg and Paul Danforth. I am joined by one half of the couple to chat about following their dreams, producing shows on Broadway, in London's West End, Off-Broadway, and in the United Kingdom. Please welcome Sean E. Nyberg.
Hello. Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Hey, Sean, first of all, how are you and where are you?
I'm great, and I am in New York right now. We were just in London last week. We're in New York this week, and we go back to London next week, and we don't live in either city. So
this is exciting. You literally don't have a home base yet in New York. You live, right? You live in Seattle?
Yep.
And you travel all around the world between New York and the UK. It's got to be so exciting for the two of you to be this new, producing duo. Tell me all about it. Like, how did you get involved in producing?
Yeah. So I had, I used to be, I still practice, but I'm a lawyer. My husband was an English teacher. And, we've been very lucky financially that we got to a point that we didn't really need to do our 9-to-5 jobs anymore. And we both were like, we don't really want to do them, And so my mom passed away last year, and we were kind of there while she was, taking care of her, and kind of watching her pass away and kind of going through that process. It really makes you look at life a little differently when it's like right in front of you. And after she passed, I kind of was like, what's my purpose now? Like when you're a caregiver and the person you're taking care of is no longer with you, you kind of feel a little lost. And I just remember thinking, like, what do we want to do now? And we're both in our early 40s. And I know a lot of people talk, there's like a lot of second and third careers that happen in people's lives. And I thought, let's do what we really love. I used to teach dance when I was younger, and I've always loved performing arts and everything. And so I'm just so happy that I got to be able to do that. Because, I made that decision in my 20s. Let's go to law school. Let's do the responsible thing. But no one ever says that the responsible thing is really following what you love, not so much what you're told you should do. And so I was just so grateful that I got the opportunity to kind of shift track in my life midway through. And then what I did is we were at Maybe Happy Ending last year. I was looking at the playbill. I was just reading the producers in the back. And I'm just like, I bet you these people are pretty easy to get a hold of through email. And I kind of, old school, I just cold called about 6 of them and just said, we're interested. This is who we are. And about 5 got back to us. And the rest is history. It's really, that's what I love about this industry, is that it's accessible, since every show is a company in itself. It's not like trying to get into Disney or Microsoft or something where you really have to work your way up. This, you can just come in as a first-time investor and suddenly be lucky and get like a Hamilton or a Wicked. And so that's what I like about it. It's weird to say Broadway is accessible, because it's not in a lot of ways. But if you're someone who's looking to invest and you have the means to do it, it is. And so we just started doing it, and there was a lot of great mentors early on, and we have about 34 shows in the last 6 months that we've invested and co-produced.
That is a crazy number of shows. I'm looking at what you guys have accomplished and what you're accomplishing. That's a big undertaking. So what was the first show you invested in? How did you get through the waters of producing?
So what happened was, we were getting all this information on shows, and I was hearing about Evita out in London, right? And that was the one that's when I was a kid, was my first love. I loved Evita. Of course, I should have realized I was gay at the time. I'm 6 years old listening to Patti LuPone. And I heard about the London revival, and of course we had seen Sunset last year, and we just really clicked with Jamie Lloyd's style. It's just something that works for both of us. And so I just asked one of these mentors, I was like, hey, are you all attached to Evita? And they're like, I'm not, but my friend is. And I ended up, that was our first investment. And we put a little bit of money in, and, did great. It was our first opening night. We flew out there in London, and we also, Heathers was another one of Heathers Off-Broadway was our second one that we got into. So those are pretty good first 2 one. And from there, it just kind of took off. I was just trying to look at my list. It's funny, I have to go back to my list because I always forget which ones we're part of. But those are the first 2. And then Hunger Games, that was another one we got into early too. So that's how we started.
I love this. You just jumped right in with this whole thing with just like, dry calling somebody. So let's talk about, how do you two choose? How do you and Paul choose the project? Because there's so many things. And I'm sure, you look at numbers and you're like, well, I don't think so. I don't think this is ever going to turn a profit. Or like, do you go with a gut feeling? Is it a combination of different things? Because, we have people watching all around the world at BroadwayWorld who'd be like, wow, I have some extra money. I've always dreamed about producing a show. So It's like, how do you choose what you want to put your money into?
If you ask my husband, he'd say that I have no standard. It's funny. Every day he comes back from the gym, and if I start the conversation with, I'll go, so, and he's like, oh, what's this new show? But first thing's gut, right? If it just sounds right, it's gotta, or more the other way. If it sounds wrong, sometimes just you're like, the premise doesn't seem like something we're interested in. But of course, you look at the recruitment schedule and you look at the budget. That's always something that you want to scan through. And you have to understand they're sometimes they're factual. Of course, the numbers can't be purposefully wrong, but they can definitely make it look, you know what I mean? They're selling the show, right? So you have to kind of cut through some of that. So we really have three criteria. One is if it looks like a financial success, like tours. Those are really great. They're hard to get into because normally they stick with the original investors of the Broadway show. But if that's one thing we look. The second thing is if it's a show that means something to us that we want to help put our money behind to help highlight, like Jellicle Ball. We're investing in that. We think that's also has financially viable, but it also we would love to support, the trans community and the ballroom culture. And so for some reason, if it just doesn't work, we would be fine if we lost money on that one because we would love to support that community. And then the third thing we look at is just opportunities to work with people that we admire. So maybe the financials might be not great and it might not, might just kind of be a middle of the road show. So we're not supporting but there's some really cool people involved that we'd like to work with and have a relationship with. And so that's kind of the third criteria. We've kind of, we've done some donating to some of the nonprofits. So that has helping a lot in terms of giving money towards shows that have some sort of social, some social message that we'd like to support. But yeah, that's kind of our criteria. And then other than that, we try to get a script or we try to get a video of the workshop and then we watch it together. And, it's like when you leave any show, you kind of stop and you look to your partner, you look to your friend and you're like, did you like it? And I think if we like it, there's likely that other people will. Shows that have struggled and closed, I don't think you probably or any of us have been surprised by some of them. You walk out and there's kind of a feeling that it didn't really work. I find myself sometimes convincing myself that a show was better than it was, but if I was trying to be honest with myself. So we really try to trust our gut. And
it's interesting, you talked about you sat at Maybe Happy Ending. It's one of my favorite musicals of all time. And like I said, Jeffrey Richards, the incredible producer, is an old school producer because that show was hemorrhaging money very early on in the preview period, and here is a show with word of mouth and everything else, and it's become one of the biggest hits in town. Now another producer might have closed that show and said, let's just cut our losses. So I give him so much kudos for what he does with the show, and especially a show like that it can happen, like The Little Show That Could, and now it's become a monster hit.
I know a lot of producers who passed on it and they are kicking themselves. That's kind of the one that's got away with a lot of people because they just didn't see the two-hander, it's South Korea, originated there. And man, what a great story. That's a success story. They need a documentary on that one here soon.
No, so it's interesting. I know your husband was a teacher. So it's like you look to him sometimes to be like, oh my gosh, what are the young kids thinking about, right? We're trying to nurture a whole new audience for Broadway, which is happening. Mm-hmm. So do you look at sort of that also?
Absolutely. Yes. And he has got a very good eye for that. I think the thing is I'm like you probably in the sense that I have all the posters and the books and I read all about the history and who owns what theater and all the fights in the 1950s. But he's a little bit less into that. And I think it actually it's a better barometer for what is going to be viable commercially because the people who actually make these shows successful are not the people who are digging through the books and the history and know all the lore and who hates who and who had, you know what I mean? And it's the regular tourist who comes along who just hears of a show and says, that sounds interesting, I'll go. And so having his perspective, and also the fact that he's a teacher, he's really good about knowing like what shows and where stories start to lose. Because when you're a teacher, all you're doing is staring at, 20, 30 kids and watching them lose interest. So he's been great. He's actually had a much higher success rate than I have in terms of, especially when we weren't investing and just going to shows, walking out and him saying, I don't think this is probably going to last. And he's been right a lot more than I have. So I really trust him. And he's very valuable in that. I mean, obviously I love him, but in terms of our partnership with this, he's very valuable.
No, you seem to be a great yin and yang, because you seem to be on the business end of it sometimes, and he seems to be, this is a really beautiful story. I think this will resonate with a larger audience. And then you sit together and you decide, let's go for it or let's not go for it, right?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a really perfect example right now. We're opening Two Strangers Carry Cake across New York on Thursday. A lot of people were skeptical over the summer when the word was that it was going to be transferring to Broadway because it's such a small show, and the Longacre Curse and all these things that you can kind of talk yourself into the why it's not going to work. And so I was skeptical, and he never saw it. I had the pro shot from Boston. He wouldn't watch it, but he just listened to the music, and he couldn't stop singing that New York song, the first song. And I was open to it. He was for it, and we got into it, and it hasn't opened yet. No jinx or anything, but it is definitely the vibe right now behind this. People talking is way stronger than I think anyone ever anticipated. I feel like it's kind of, I don't want to say the maybe happy ending of this season, because I don't like, every show's different, right? But I think the little smaller, quirky show, I think people are wanting a little bit of that right now. Maybe not the big extravagant, the big extravagant sets. And so that was one where he definitely was right. I wasn't against it, but I was a little bit more skeptical. And he was like, no, this is fun. This is light. I think we've got enough darkness in the world. I think people want to go and see two people who are, it's a love letter to New York, and we haven't had that kind of in a while. So yeah, he was right about that.
Well, I want to tell you, it's one of my favorite new musicals. I was there on Saturday. I've already spoken to the cast and the creators. I love this show. I wish you nothing but the biggest success. On Saturday, the audience had the time of their life. They were dancing onto the street, and the two stars in that show, primarily newcomers, are absolutely superb. So I wish you the very best. And I'm glad you decided to do that. You also produce a lot Off-Broadway, which I love the resurgence in Off-Broadway, because there hasn't been one in a very, very long time. So talk about the different dynamics of investing on Broadway and then investing Off-Broadway.
Of course, yeah. I mean, money, that's really the biggest, especially when you have the New World stages with those 499 seat theaters. You're one seat away from the budget being 3 to 4 times bigger and the running costs being double, right? And so that's a lot of fun. And it actually, what I think it does, so we're in Heather's and Spelling Bee, which we opened a couple days ago. And what it does is it allows, I feel like everyone feels a little more free. You know what I mean? I feel like when you've got the budget that you've got to recoup and you've got the high weekly running costs, it kind of feels like a weighted blanket. Everyone's always so stressed, and when you've got like a $2.5 million budget versus a $25 million budget, and you can run the show for $200,000 a week instead of $750,000 a week, people are a little bit more relaxed. And when there's maybe a slower month in September, just classic late September, early October, slow down, people aren't freaking out. They're like, hey, we got a little reserve. We're going to be okay. And so that's what really attracted us to it. And also, I mean, what's really the difference now? You've got Lorna Courtney, Casey Likes, you've got Jasmine Amy Rogers over at Spelling Bee. You got Kevin McHale. Like, you've got big stars in these great shows. And I'll tell you this, there's a lot of producers who are doing the Off-Broadway ones who have been burned in the past, going from off to on with their shows. And so it's kind of been nice for Paul and I to get the benefit of their prior struggles, because none of these shows have any anticipation of transferring to Broadway, because they know that can kill a show. It's just, it can overwhelm a show. And so it's nice that's kind of right now. People in the producing and investing community, an Off-Broadway show has a little bit of like a star next to it, and people are kind of more drawn to that. There are some people who only want to do Broadway shows because they want the Tony possibility and stuff. But I think finding that in the West End, Off-Broadway in the West End, and tours. But like I said, tours are hard to get into. So the two that you get often presented to you are Off-Broadway and West End. And I mean, when they're a quarter the price and half the running cost, it's kind of hard not to think about that.
Well, let's talk about the West End. What a major resurgence that a lot of American producers are now going over there to start shows on the West End and taking a look at those shows. So talk about the difference of producing on Broadway as opposed to the West End.
Yeah, but also want to ask you, I can read all I want about the history and stuff. Is this really pretty rare right now that like West End and Off-Broadway seem to be kind of the premier spot than Broadway? Is that kind of new right now? Is it not really always been the case?
Well, no, West End, like David Merrick looked for a lot of shows all during like the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. He brought many shows over from London, as did Alexander Cohen. So people have always looked over there, for shows like Oliver, Stop the World. All those shows have all come over. So it's always been that. But it's less expensive to produce over there and to start a new musical, isn't it?
Very much so, and more so than ever. I think it's always been a little bit cheaper, but it is in the last 2 years just. The difference between has been huge. And a lot of producers are thinking of West End as almost like an out-of-town run, and that's what's really hurting, I think, some of these and I'll get to the West End in a sec, but they go to La Jolla or Seattle at the Fifth Avenue and some of these other cities. And by the time they come in, they're already $10 million in without any of the Broadway budget, just from having to do these out-of-town runs. So if you can do it for $2 million in London, of course, why not? And it's prestigious. I mean, the West End, and some people think it's more prestigious or just as prestigious as Broadway. And so it's been great. I mean, Sunset Boulevard. Everyone's really fascinated to see how O'Mary does with the transfer, and Death Becomes Her, and whenever in a year or so, whenever that they think about doing that, because the humor is so different, and it's just interesting to see how that's going to translate. And so that's one downside, is that some of these things, we're very similar, but there's also little things that are different enough that can hurt a show. So again, the shows are about a third of the cost or a fourth budget. And I think a lot of it comes from, they get a lot of help from the UK government, the federal government. It's not like the state here, it's the federal. It's the public likes the tax credit, so it's not something they have to fight for every year. And they're willing to take some risks, I think, more than we are. And so if something doesn't, the fact that it's cheaper, if something doesn't run for a while, you'll still get most of your money back. So people are more willing to take some chances. Where out here, it's either you boom or you bust. And I think the concern out here is that you can only bust so many times as an investor that you just end up not wanting to invest at all, or maybe cut back a little bit. And I do wonder if that's one of the reasons why we're only getting about 4 new musicals this season, when last season I don't know what, a dozen or so brand new musicals, because a lot of people got burnt last year, like not 50% burnt, 100% burnt. And you turn to your wife or your partner, your husband, and you say, "Hey, do you want to do this new show?" And they're like, "Let's take a year off," But when you're out in London, I mean, a bad show is like 80% return, which is not great, obviously that's not the idea, but that's not a bad show, And so, and it's just, I feel like it's more, they'll take more risks, it's less expensive, and it's just a different vibe out there. It's kind of fun. Again, I think it's like the Off-Broadway, where it doesn't feel quite as, everyone's not sleepless, smoking cigarettes, and well, I mean, some are, what I'm saying, though, but like worried. And also it's kind of fun to fly out to London, it feels special to go out there when you're from the States. Yeah.
You were talking about, we talked before, you think the costs are very, very high on Broadway.
Yes.
And, is there a way to figure this all out? What are your thoughts on how to change this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me fix Broadway for you. Everyone sit down. What I do want to say is, because, I do follow a lot of the online, like the discourse amongst fans, and there's kind of this idea that, oh yes, every 3 years, Broadway's going to fail, right? We've been hearing this since the 50s even, I do think this is different. And again, everyone says that too. This is different. But, 9/11, the '08 crisis, COVID, those were all times when everyone was kind of white knuckling to see if we could make it through. But those were all external problems that once the external thing kind of fixed, all the boats kind of rose again, all the businesses came back. This issue right now is very like Broadway created. Granted, the economy is not great, but the economy is never great, really. I mean, every time you think it's great, look at a different group of people. So it's not so much the broader economy. I think Broadway has a problem that's unique to Broadway that isn't going to be fixed because the economy just comes back. And it's just way too expensive. And inflation has a lot to do with it, but the thing with inflation is that, and so some of the people who are watching, the inflation is the overall increase in pricing goods. It's not one good, like it's not like diapers go up, and it's all prices. When inflation improves, it doesn't get cheaper. It just slows down the growth. So things are not going to get cheaper, and it's barely being able to maintain as is. And a healthy economy gets about 2% inflation. So the point is that we have to somehow figure out how to fund these shows, knowing they're not going to get cheaper just because the economy improves. And the other problem is that it's not like there's a silver bullet. It's not just the producers. It's not just the theaters. It's not. There's a little bit. It's kind of a little bit of problem on everybody. Some of these union contracts are pretty old, and I feel like they need to really get revived. The cost of living is going up, so we can't pay. We don't want to pay the actors and behind the scenes staff any less. We don't want to, and so we can't, and we shouldn't. So what needs to happen, I think, is that development costs just need to come down. We need to stop doing these really long runs out of town, and coming in with already $10 million in the hole. And I feel like a lot of people are coming up with ideas. I know a lot of producers who are like 35 to 45 years old who have some really great ideas. And I just hope that they can kind of break through like the old guard. Not, what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to change anything, right? And so, but there's these great ideas about how to develop these shows. And also, if a show is $10 million in the hole and it's not working, they're not pulling them. They're just like, you know what? We're already this deep in. Let's just get it on Broadway and see what happens. And so what does that do? We add another $15 million on the $25 million now. It's going to lose everything. And then now there's $25 million worth of investing money who aren't going to be that excited to invest in the next show. And so I know a lot of people say, well, what does it look like for Broadway to bust? It's going to be hard to find investors. And, there was that lawsuit, the cabaret lawsuit that happened. And a lot of people, because, I'm a lawyer, people ask me my opinion, and I don't want to dive into that waters on here. But I will say one thing it does show is this guy was a first-time investor. And so what it looks to me is that they're having to go to farther and farther out circles to get investors, because the core investing group that most of the shows have relied upon may not be quite as willing to invest as they used to be. Add that on top of more expensive shows, and they're going to have to go out to like people who've never invested before. And it's kind of a sign to me that maybe these lead producers are, not want to say desperate, right? But they're having a harder time funding their shows than they have in the past. And I think that's going to be a problem. And I think we'll just see less shows.
The other interesting thing is I started going to the theater in the late 60s, early 70s. And if you look back, there were always hit shows in a season, and there were flop shows and shows that were just sort of eking by. That's always been the way. Hal Prince paid $800,000, whatever it was, for Follies. But at the time, if you multiply it now, that's like a $25 million musical. So, I mean, we always had that. And my whole thing is, it shouldn't take 10 years for a musical to come in. If it does, I just don't think it's very good. And I'll tell you why. Because, Kander and Ebb did Floor of the Red Menace. It closed. The next day, Hal said, what do you want to do? Here's the, I Am a Camera books. Here we are. They wrote Cabaret. You know what I mean? They all wrote these hit shows in one season. They came in. I mean, someone working on this show for 10 years. I'm like, and then it comes in and it folds. I mean, I don't understand that element of why someone has to have 6 workshops that have put them in a $12 million, hole.
Yeah, before a single set's been built that they can use on Broadway, and they're already in the hole. That's a really good point. Yeah, they did kind of churn them out fairly quick, and I think there's something to be said about that. It keeps it cheaper, but maybe also keeps it fresh.
But they were great. They were great. I mean, like I said, you know that when someone said, "Oh, we've been trying to get this off the ground for 20 or 15 years." And the other thing I have an issue with is I don't understand. I know everybody said we have to have our burners filled. I mean, one writing team should be working on one show that's coming in and a director and a choreographer, I think, because, I mean, you can't split the creative brain between a director and a choreographer working on 3 shows at the same time. It just doesn't work because 2 of them are going to suffer.
Absolutely.
You know that as a producer. So, like I said, we don't have the David Merricks, the Hal Princes anymore. That, Sondheim worked on one show with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They worked on Night Music. The year before, they worked on Company or Follies. Then they worked on Company. It wasn't like I had 4 shows.
That's a great point. Yeah, fantastic. You know what? Where we see the fast turnaround more is with plays, and those are much better investments right now. Plays on Broadway. I mean, look, I know they don't have to be Keanu Reeves or Denzel Washington, but even the mid-tier or even just Broadway stars that are outside those are doing much better because they only cost $5 million because they're either revivals or they're put together pretty quick. That's a great point. Yeah, 10 years, and I feel like it loses some of its spark that it might have had at the beginning, and then it's that idea. It's like musical by committee. It's.
Well, that's the worst thing now. I mean, it's great to collaborate, but the people who should collaborating should just be the creators primarily and a producer who has that creative eye.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I know the whole producing thing now, there's, for a play with 2 people, there are 45 people billed above the title. I'm not saying anything about that, but the point is that everybody wants to have a say. There has to be one person, guiding this ship. There really has to be. Otherwise, you know that.
Well, let me tell you, you're right. But I do, and this, and maybe the people who are watching don't, they don't really have a say. We don't have a say, the co-producers, but I will say, so I co-produce, I do like both. Like I co-produce and invest. But when we co-produce, we've only put in our own money. So if we're doing if we have to do 250, like we did, I'll be open about some, we did 250,000 for Jellicle Ball and 250,000 for Lost Boys. And that was we just put our own cash in there. So we didn't have to raise money. But a lot of these co-producers, they haven't put any. Okay, I don't want to paint, but a lot of them don't put their own money in, but they're representing 10 investors. We really don't have a say in what happens with the show, and sometimes it's kind of hard to get information from the lead producer. I don't blame them because they're working their butt off, but that's also hard. And remember, I said there's I think one issue that the lead producers need to work on is being a little bit more transparent. Because I've always been told by my therapists over the years that the main reason for anxiety is the unknown. Like even if it's bad news, if you know it, you can at least have you calm with it and have an idea of how can we. But this idea that it's really hard to get information can create this. So what do we automatically assume when it's hard to get information? That something's being hidden from us. And so that's just a natural thing I think that humans do. And so then it creates this kind of well, what's really going on? And now you can always go to their offices and review it. I'm just saying that is one thing I think that we have some more transparency with these shows and where the money's going. And why are these shows still running if it's not making money? I could see if it's struggling in October because you're hey, November, December, we're going to do great. But that's another thing that I think they need to see. Then you and I are having a good talk. That's kind of the problem is I think it's death by 1,000 cuts, which makes it harder to come up with a solution because it's not like we just have to cut out the cancer. It's spread everywhere. So how do we address it? And I think the biggest thing they can do right now is work on the development costs. And I don't want to give away their business plan, but there's one group I'm talking to, and they're thinking of it, trying to shape it more like a movie studio, where you have a lot of shows in development, and then to the point where they can cut it. Let's say one workshop, as opposed to the problem, like you said, 10 years with one show, a producer is not going to just let it go because they're this is a fifth of my life. But being able to be it's not working. Let's put the resources towards something different. And I was and I think that's one thing that I think could be really helpful and help with the costs. But it's go ahead.
It's an ongoing conversation, but Broadway will always be there. There's always going to be another show waiting to go into a house. And, my final question for you is, what advice would you offer somebody who wants to start investing because they love the theater and have some extra money?
Perfect. Thank you for asking, because I get that message a lot. I would say, first of all, get a little vulnerable, call or email just random producers that you see on the back of these things, and they'll take time. As you know, probably as a journalist, people love talking about what they do for a living, right? So they, especially in the arts, and just cold call and ask, and then trust your gut. Most people are good. There's a few people that I run into that feel a little bit like they don't have my best interest at heart, but trust your gut, like I said, and you can kind of tell. Ask a lot of questions, and then more of the financial side. Spread your money around a little bit. Like I told you, 2 big investments we did, but we have a lot of like 25,000, and also the way we spread it around is we do like Broadway and West End, but then we do a lot of off-Broadway, do off West End and tours. We do musicals and plays. And so you kind of, like you have a wide variety in case one area is not really doing great. You at least have these other shows. And I don't know. And also it's a lot of fun, and go into it for the experience. And one last thing I really wanted to say this too is I hear people dismiss investing in theaters a lot as, well, they love theater. So, if the show closed, but they love theater. And if you put money in the stock market, on average, it grows 10% a year, right? And so if you recoup, you technically have lost 10%, because that you could have got it. So we need to stop thinking of recoupment as a win. Recoupment shouldn't be a win, because in any other investment, it's not a win. And also stop thinking of theatrical investors as people, well, they like the theater, so it's okay. Because if people who really just care about the theater and don't care about making money, they donate to Roundabout and Lincoln Center and all these other places, which we did. We did a large donation to Roundabout, which is why for Rocky Horror and stuff. But the other ones, there's an intent, there's some sort of hope that your money's being treated with respect, and that if there's a money to be made, that they'll do their best to make it for you. And so and it's not, I don't want to speak for me, but I just think if investors keep being treated like they'll always be there, they're going to eventually not. And that, I think, is where we're going to start seeing some issues, if there are. But you're right. A great show is always going to find investors. And maybe we have some theaters that are empty for a while. And I mean, the 80s, right? There was a lot of empty theaters. We've survived that. So, yeah.
There's a love for Broadway. There always has been. Look at this. There's nothing more exciting than Broadway, off-Broadway, London. I mean, it's all live. You have to make your money. A movie can open in 2,500 or 2,500 theaters in 1 week and make most of their money back.
Yes.
Broadway has to run 8 performances a week. It's an incredible art that no one else can do. There'll always be people coming here. I think, like I said, it's people like you, 34 shows, diversified all across the board, because you love what you do.
I do. And I love the people here. It's a business about people. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I've had a great conversation with you. Please say hello to your husband, Paul, for me. And like I said, I'll see you on the carpet on Thursday, because like I said, Two Strangers, again, a small, perfect musical, so uplifting. Everybody walked out of a Longacre with a smile on their face. An incredible score, an incredible story. It's a small musical. It's a beautiful musical with a big heart.
Well, thanks for all you do. You're great. You bring a lot of enthusiasm to the industry, and I love that, because I feel like we need a lot of that in the world today. So
listen,
thank you.
You all make magic. I just celebrate. It's what I do. There's nothing. I've been going to Broadway since I've been 10 years old. I remember everything about that first time, like walking down 45th Street and saying, this is where I want to be for the rest of my life. So, and I'm sure you're the same way. So everybody, go see a show, Broadway, off-Broadway in London, or a local theater.
Amen.
Anywhere. Just go see theater. There's nothing like it. Sean, take care, my friend.
You too. See you later. Bye.